all the way live from New York, and thank you for coming. And go ahead, you could start your panel. We're excited to hear from you.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you again for Morgan who set this up. Really incredible. Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Nelson Diaz. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll go into a little story about me as a Latino animator here in New York City. I'm going to share my screen real quick. That should be coming up in a second. Awesome. And of course, I am going to go to my favorite place in the world, which is Canva. I don't know how many of you are using Canva. I actually can't see folks who are here while I'm speaking. I see myself in a little thing. I'd like to point out one thing before I get started. I actually work at an amazing organization called New York Edge, which is right here in this little camera. And I'm part of the New York Edge animation studios, which you can see in my background. And I kept this up purposely because New York Edge is an amazing uh, company, and I'll talk about them at the end of this and talk about my role there. But we do after school with kids. But without further ado, I'm going to get into this. And this is Morgan asked me what this should be called, and I wanted to talk about being a Latino dude in New York City and coming up in the animation industry specifically. I am Nelson Diaz. I am an animator, artist, and teacher, educator. But this talk is called You Belong Here, and you all belong here. I just want to say that to everybody. You should give yourselves a pat on the back for being who you are because you are marvelous. And why do you belong here? Why do I belong here? I'll talk about this a little bit as I go. So who am I? I'm Nelson Diaz. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a creative director. I'm an animator. I'm a character designer. I am a dad. I have two kids, lovely kids, Teddy and Ava. I am Puerto Riqueño. I am also a dog and a cat dad. I have some fur babies. And I will travel, meaning, I take work anywhere I can get it. I've gone to California to work. I've worked in LA before, but I am New York based for the most part. I've also gone to weird places to work, like Indiana, which I can sort of talk about a little later. And it does come up in my sort of story. But like I said, I'm born and raised in New York. My parents, um, I'll talk about them for a second. But first, I'll talk about some realizations I've had. I really wanted to make this a story about coming up in the New York City animation and identity. The reason I called it, or when Morgan asked me what the talk was going to be called, is You Belong Here, is because coming up in animation, I had a couple of realizations. I am a person of color, though I'm light skinned. I noticed that a lot of the people that I worked with in animation were white. And for the most part, they would do two things. They would group me as one of their own, and they would think I'm Italian or Russian or just American in general. And I am American, but I very strongly identify as Latino. And or they group me as other, and they let me know straight off the bat that I was not like them. Case in point, I mentioned Indiana. One of my best friends from Indiana, who's an incredible animator named Wes Burnick. I worked with him on a project, went out there into the middle of nowhere. Really nervous when I got there because when I got to the airport and I got the car rental, I thought someone was playing a practical joke on me. I was being told to go to this person's house, and I started driving, and it's just farmland. So I reached Wes's house, and Wes is an incredible artist and illustrator. We worked on a bunch of cartoons for Career Builder together. But when we were out there, we talked about identity. He knew I was Puerto Rican, and Wes is an American guy from the Midwest, from Indiana. But he told me one of the funniest things, which is like he's like, when I was in New York, I told him I always had some issues with identity. Sometimes I meet Latino people, and they would think I'm white, or they think I'm super American or not Latino enough, and I'd meet white people like Wes, and Wes was like, "Well, when you're out here in Indiana, you stick out like a sore thumb because you do not look like the rest of us." Um, And this had sort of an interesting effect, which is sort of the second realization on here. It sort of had me feeling my identity a little bit more acutely as a Latino and as an artist, but it also made me feel really awkward, right? Like where do I sort of fit in as I go about the world? And then I realized, well, first and foremost, I'm a New Yorker. I'm a New Yorican. My parents came here from Puerto Rico when they were both 5, and they came up in the Lower East Side. I also realized, and this took me many years, I've been in the animation industry. I'll talk about this for about 21 years. And I realize I'm neurodivergent, right? I don't really think like anybody else except for other creatives. Many of my friends who turn out to be also neurodivergent. And so all of these things have sort of shaped my identity. And then finally, later on in my career, and again, I'll sort of work towards this, I started to realize that, hey, I belong here. This is a place for me, and I'm sort of going to carve myself a spot in the animation industry. And eventually I did through some sort of trials and tribulations. But also, I wanted to have this talk about everyone who is listening to this and listening to sort of my story and let you know that you belong here too. And we need your voice. We need your stories and your voices. And we don't have enough of them. And I'll sort of get to that. A lot of it I'll talk about as I go into education and how that sort of shaped this talk and what I'm sort of thinking. Yeah, so I have ADHD, I have dyscalculia, so I sort of reverse numbers. I've got mild anxiety. I'm not bilingual, and this has always been a point of contention. I can speak some Spanish, but my sister speaks better Spanish than me. Um, Her partner is Dominican, and they all speak Spanish, and so she's gotten a bit more of that. But it's always been, all these things on this list have always been a thing. The ADHD and dyscalculia came about later, but what's interesting about it is that I don't think they're faults against my identity. They are things that shape my identity and make me stronger. Um, and I'll tell you why. Oh, so like I said, my family comes from the Lower East Side. We were a lower middle class family, and they came from lower middle class, and that's a piragua. If you know, you know. If you're down in the Lower East Side and you've had that shaved ice, I grew up with that. And the reason I say this is because when I went to School of Visual Arts, I had sort of like this weird reverse culture shock. I realized I never thought about my height and who I was. I realized, pretty quickly, a lot of my friends, and this remains true, a lot of my friends in the animation industry have somehow wound up being taller white guys. One of the reasons is because the animation industry is predominantly white and predominantly male. And I realized, I'm sort of like a short, light brown, fat guy. And I say that with a lot of confidence and gusto, like not fat in a bad way. I've got some shape to me, and I love it. And I'm mighty because of that. That's not a bad thing. But I realized there were some differences out there as I started working. To this day, all of my friends in the animation, a lot of them are super tall. I'm usually the shortest one there. It's really funny. There are people shorter than me too, but for the most part, when I'm around the guys, I tend to be the little dude there with them. Um, and when I was at SB, there was a kind of this weird sort of culture shock. I grew up in New York. I was lucky enough to go to the High School of Art and Design, studied art there. And then I went to and got very lucky, got accepted into School of Visual Arts. And when I got there, I noticed I was getting culture shock in a sort of reverse way. I wasn't going to other parts of the country or going out of the country. I was having people come to my city from Ohio, from Kansas, from France, from Colombia, everywhere in the world. And they were coming to New York, and I was meeting all these people from places I had never thought of. One of the things that was really upsetting and sort of shocking was I remember talking to a guy in the animation department, and I told him I was Puerto Rican, and we had been in class together for a long time, and he was surprised that I was Hispanic, and he said, yeah, I'm from Connecticut, and he was just like, everyone who's there, anyone who's Hispanic is kind of lazy there, And that was so one of the most upsetting things I've ever heard. And we had this huge sort of talk back and forth where I was just like, where is that coming from? And I realized it was another thing that sort of pushed my identity, realizing who I was as a sort of Latino, and realizing that all these people from all these places bring what they bring from the places, from their families. But when you hear things like that, all of a sudden you're sort of like, well, is my dad lazy? Is my family lazy? I think Latinos are some of the most hardest working, smartest people around. And so he is a person I had to re-educate and sort of teach, hey, this is a horrible, horrible thing that you are sort of holding on to. Let me re-guide this for you. Let me repurpose this for you. Is really awful, but very shocking. And then again, animation is very much still a boys' club. Most of the guys who I have worked with in the past have all been pretty cool, but there have often been sort of a lack of black and brown people. It has shifted a lot since I've worked. Like I said, I've worked probably about 21 years. And when I was at School of Visual Arts, there weren't as many women as there are now. As an educator now, it's incredibly exciting because I see most of my classes are filled with young women, women of color, and they are coming up with incredible stories and working on incredible stories. But if you look at the women in animation statistics, they have some great papers. I was looking at a paper last night from a Brazilian Animation Institute. The numbers are still not great in terms of women in animation, in terms of minorities in animation. So the reason, again, this whole talk, I wanted to sort of change it up. Usually I just do a talk about my career. I wanted to change this up because I want you to know, again, you belong here. We need your stories. We need your voices. And, it's been really difficult to find out that a lot of women study animation, go into it. A lot of people who are minorities study animation, go into it, and then they get to the workforce and they decide not to stay for a variety of reasons. Um, I have been lucky enough to sort of carve out a place for myself, but it took some time. Once I started to realize animation, sort of a boys' club, and I started to find other Latinos, other black and brown folks that I sort of related to, you start to realize, oh, they have a whole other path that they came from, but their path is valid and amazing. And there were a couple of times where I almost quit, to be quite frank. A lot of animation studios can be really hard. Um, for the last 21 years, I've worked on about 8 television shows as a character designer, a character animator, and a compositor. Some of them you may have seen up on the screen here, like Wonder Pets. I've done some shorts for Sesame Street, which have been really beautiful to realize you work on something. And one day I had Sesame Street on for my 2-year-old, and the piece of animation I made showed up on Sesame Street while they were watching it. And it was such a beautiful moment to see my 2 children watch something I animated on Sesame Street, because I remember watching Sesame Street. So there was this really wonderful full circle moment where I sort of realized, oh man, I am having this impact. All these things I've worked on have, and most of these are children's shows, with the exception of Our Cartoon President and Fairview, which are adult shows. But most of them have been children's shows. And when I look online, usually I teach classes and I mention Wonder Pets. So many animators and budding animators and students have seen Wonder Pets, have seen Third and Bird or Kappa Mikey, or the Sesame Street short I worked on, which is called Quiet Loud. And then I'll go online and see that it has millions of views. And it's so weird and surreal to realize you have this impact on young people's lives. So that's been a really beautiful thing. Some of the shows I worked on had studios where had pretty toxic workplaces, but what wasn't toxic was the camaraderie I had with everyone there. At a lot of these places, I met a lot of people of color, minorities, who are still in the animation industry today doing incredible things. Right off the bat, I can tell you on WonderPret, I worked with someone named Aaron Natal, who's an incredible animator, 3D animator, who's gone on to do amazing game work in animation. I work with Aaron Brewer, who is a wonderful black animator who works in LA on a variety of shows, super talented, and so many others. But on these shows specifically, those are two of my really good friends who are still in the animation industry. I also got to work on one feature film, which is something I did for the Fantastic Four. It never made it to the movie. These were supposed to be for the end credits. They were trying to go for a 60s sort of look. And so we got to sort of play with these versions of Reed Richards and Thing and Invisible Woman and Human Torch. And for me, as a kid in New York City, my dad and my tío grew up with Marvel Comics, and then I grew up with Marvel Comics. So this was a big deal for me. This was right before the movie released, probably 6 months before it. It didn't make it into the movie, but it was so awesome to get this call to work on this. This was only a short period of time for a weekend, but one of those big dream milestone projects you sort of hope for. Really cool to work on. I also worked on one PBS documentary, and I always bring this up because a career in animation, a career in the arts often means that your career sort of bleeds into other art fields. I was not an animator on this documentary. The mother of my children animated this, but what she animated from were my courtroom sketches. I bring this up because I am not a courtroom sketch artist, nor did I ever really think about courtroom sketching. After many years in animation, I was at a creative startup and we did mostly commercial work, but they sent me to Texas for about 2 weeks to do courtroom sketching. I think Morgan might have heard me sort of talk about this in our other friend's class that she had at Montclair State University. But this documentary means a lot to me. It's an incredible story. It's a hard story. It's called A Town Called Victoria, and it was on PBS's Independent Lens. But they sent me to Texas for 2 weeks to draw in a federal court case. If you know anything about federal court cases, there are no cameras or flash photography or photography of any kind allowed. They allow phones, but the minute someone takes out a phone, they get rid of the phones. So in this case, I had to sit there and draw everyone in the courtroom for 2 weeks. And one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but so thrilling and amazing and such a wonderful project to be a part of. I never thought I'd work on a sort of documentary like this. I never thought about it just because I had worked on so many children's shows and cartoons. And, like I said, I wanted to work on something like a Marvel feature film, which I got to do. But this is one of the most beautiful projects I've ever worked on. If you get a chance, you can find it on YouTube or PBS's Independent Lens. And it's just a really beautiful project where, again, I wasn't expecting to work on this. So you'd be surprised just when you work on, the things you sort of love, or maybe you went to school for animation or 3D, or you want to draw. You never know where your passions will sort of take you, those branching paths. It really is like a tree. You work on one thing and something branches out from that. And it's just one of these really beautiful things that can happen when you start a career in the arts. And currently, after teaching at School of Visual Arts, I am now the Senior Animation Experience Designer at New York Edge with my co-directors, Vincent Spencer and Megan Bessel-Dua. And this organization is incredible because they have after-school programs in New York City, in many of the schools in New York City, and we basically make animation curriculum. We do stop motion curriculum, 3D curriculum. We're working on a 2D character design experience, and right now I'm creating a STEM animation experience that sort of bridges the gap between science and animation, and sort of science experiments in animation. And I also teach at RealWorks, which is another organization that has high school students. I teach an animation lab there. Actually, that's where I was before this. And then I headed over here to do this talk. But I have a bunch of amazing high school students. And like I said, a lot of the students, and you can sort of see it in the photo, and it's one of the reasons I put it up there, is because a lot of the population of the animation programs, they're changing. When I went to school, I was mostly there with a bunch of mostly white guys and some women and some minorities. But now the classes that I'm getting at New York Edge, at RealWorks, I also worked at an after school for a charter school. It's changing. It's becoming black and brown faces and more female, and it's amazing, and more LGBTQ plus. It's so amazing to see all these people, and the talent is incredible. Um, what's interesting is that the industry is sort of shifting right now, and all the gatekeepers are trying really hard to make AI the thing. There is a pretty strong rejection from the student population, or at least that's what I found. I'm sure some people have some other stories about that. But in my classes, a lot of people just want to make hand drawn things. They want to make hand drawn art, 2D art, and they really just want to make it themselves. So that's been a really sort of wonderful thing that's been coming out of teaching. I never thought I'd be a teacher. Some people had suggested I might make a good one, maybe because I like to talk and I'm pretty friendly, but also I just love the craft of animation. One of the things that has been a saving grace for me as an animator is I really like learning about everything. Today we had two guest speakers in my animation lab, and we just talked about how if you're an animator, you become a student of life because really everything you are looking at around you, coffee cups, filigree on the side of a building or embroidery on a shirt, shoes, clothes, computers, furniture, everything is interesting and everything can be a reference for what you want to make in the story you're trying to tell. All of it is part of the world, and the world is beautiful and fascinating. It can also be a horrific place, but there's also immense beauty. And we just talked about that in the class, and it's sort of a really beautiful thing. Another thing I'll sort of shift to real quickly is I have yet another deck that I will share with you all, which is I I spent a lot of time doing a lot of different animation. I spent a lot of time doing GIFs. These are some GIFs I did last year with Giphy for Zillow and Bacardi and Pepsi. Um, I never thought I'd animate a Pepsi can dancing with the chicken drumstick and a barbecue grill. Um, and yet I got paid to do that, and it was immense fun. And this took me this sounds really silly, but working on stuff like this took me quite a while because um, I had to make my own GIFs. You can see some of these GIFs here on Giphy. They're a little choppy right now because of the internet connection. But all these GIFs I made for fun. You might, if you look carefully, you might spot Walter Mercado, our famous Latino psychic who would show up on Sábado Gigante on Saturdays, of course. If any of you here watch that with your grandparents or your parents, I know that was always on at my grandparents' house, and Walter Mercado would always show up, and con mucho amor, he'd say with much love, and he'd do like a whole spiel about the various signs. So I had to make a GIF about this. What was fun about that is that GIF has showed up on the Walter Mercado documentary. It's all the way at the end of the documentary, which is really funny. I didn't expect that. But also, it's just been fun to make your own thing. And then when you realize is once you find your voice and you become comfortable with who you are and you make art from that true place in your heart where it's coming from confidence and a sense of wonder and awe in what you love and the passion you hold, you start getting noticed. You start getting work from that. You start getting people who want to work with you. And so I made these GIFs, and that's just what happened. And then I was able to sort of work on these other clients, Pepsi, Zillow, and also some of these GIFs wound up in some children's hospitals in Australia and some places in Germany. Really sort of interesting what some little pieces of animation can end up doing, the sort of power they have. But like I said, this is a little bit of my own work. I'm a character designer. That's really my love and my passion, is just making cute characters and fun characters. I'm a Star Trek fan. I am definitely an animation fanboy and video game fanboy, and so I'll make all these designs, and again, making stuff from the heart, stuff with your passion. I remember at my grandma's place in East Houston Street, Lower East Side, getting Super Nintendo for the first time and going across the hallway in her apartment building to my cousin's place who had Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo. Huge sort of moment where you get that arcade game in the house and playing with that. So a lot of my art is very sort of influenced by that. But this is kind of my passion here. And once again, this sort of coffee cup design, you start forming friendships in animation with lots of people, and when people like your work, they offer you really neat projects. Two of my friends were investors in this coffee company called Canary Cafe in Houston, Texas. So they asked me to design this canary logo. It was supposed to be this hipster canary. One of my favorite projects ever. Wasn't expecting to be asked to do this. So I got to do these sketches, and these wound up on all their artwork, all their business cards, all their coffee cups, even on the sign outside. Um, I don't have the slide here, but I have some photos of it. But just you never know, again, where your passion, what you love to do when you make things from the heart, what it's going to lead to, what sort of projects. And this was just an example of that happening. And just more artwork I like to show of stuff that is just my own that I love to do. This here is my reel. I don't think it'll play, and I don't want it to be super choppy, so I'll go back to my Canva real quick. So New York Edge, but all of this took a long time. All of this took a lot of effort. There were moments where I was sort of unsure of myself about what I sort of wanted to do in animation, and whether it was worth it. Sometimes you work at a place where they give you a lot of notes. I also have this thing called RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So it means anytime someone gives me a note, I always take it super personally, not because they meant anything personally, but because it's just hard. Maybe some of you are like that. And it's part of sort of the ADHD thing. But once I sort of realized that, and that I had that, oh, this becomes part of the puzzle, part of the identity of who I am. And it's not a bad thing. It's something to cope with and something to work around with. It's not a bad thing because it makes me more empathetic. And being more empathetic, I can make art that feels more like it's from my heart to everybody else's. And it can get hard when you're in an animation. But what has been amazing is all the people, all these faces you see here, everyone, you find those people who love what you do, and you realize that they might give you notes and you might feel bad about that, but they're trying to help you. And you persevere, you survive, and you end up collaborating with amazing people across the board. So that's my little talk. I would love to talk with you all about more career things. I just want to say thank you to everyone here. And you can see I have my website there, but I also have my email, nelsart@gmail.com. I love talking shop. If you have questions, if you want to talk about animation, or if you're working on a project and you need help, including advice or just technical questions, or you ever want to reach out and have a coffee in New York City and talk about where you belong, please reach out. I love talking to people. But that's me in a nutshell. I'm Nelson, and thanks for listening. I'd love to answer some questions if anyone's got it.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions? And thank you so much again, Nelson. That was beautiful. And I had no idea of this journey and how multifaceted you are and everything. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or I don't know if Morgan, you had some that you wanted to ask. I know you know Nelson from way back.
I wouldn't say way back, but I do kind of know him. I just want to take a moment in case anyone has any questions before I ask. Um, but in the meantime, I just want to say thank you for showing up. Very amazing, incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I do want to ask though, I guess if you I see some people here from New York, and I guess I wanted to ask you what your experience has been like in this industry in New York City.
Um, what my experience has been like in New York City in the industry of animation.
Yes, yes.
Um, it's it's been a interesting one to this point. The reason I say that is because when I entered animation, it was 2006. I graduated 2005. I'm 43. I am what you called an old or an ancient, as the internet young people would say. But yeah, started in 2006, and I was really lucky. A lot of times, what can end up happening is, depending on how the animation industry is at any current moment, you could enter an industry that has a sort of bad market where people are not getting jobs. My The mother of my children, who is an amazing animator, um, got, graduated in 2001. So, of course, in 2001, September 11th happened. And when that happened, people really lost confidence in everything. Is a sort of depressing moment for everyone, and really terrifying. And so that changed the industry. So when she got out of SVA, there weren't a lot of jobs. When I graduated in 2005, going into the animation industry, it was a lot better. So I was able to work with, right out of the gate, right out of school, an amazing graphic designer named Rafael Esquer, who has a studio in New York City called Alfalfa Studio. And Rafael Esquer is an amazing, super famous graphic designer who he actually designed the Made in New York logo. He also designed the current logo for the Houston Rockets and a multitude of other things. And he had, and this is also full circle, talking with you here and talking about being Latino. But the first project I worked on was a Hispanic Heritage Month project. And he got that because he knew an art director or creative director at Nickelodeon. So he was kind of my first job, first foray into animation. I was very lucky to work with him. He's an amazing artist. Actually, if anyone is ever looking for an internship at a graphic design studio, maybe he'll kill me for saying this. I don't think so, though, because he always has interns. He's an amazing person to contact, because he always has young people working there on actual projects, like hands on. So definitely check out Alfalfa Studio. But I started working there, and the first thing right out of the gate that I was really upset, or not upset by, but it was a sort of big thing that made me nervous, was we started working on the project. I got there at 10, and I was like, oh, 10 a.m. is a weird time to start. And 6 p.m. 5 p.m. rolls around, and I'm like, oh, no one's leaving. 6 p.m. rolls around, still no one's leaving. 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Finally, around 8 p.m., Raphael's like, okay, he's like, you should probably head home. And that first day, I was just like, wow. I was like, is this what it's like? Does everyone leave this late? And that was a big eye opener. A lot of times at that time at creative, art studios, animation studios, people work from 10 to 6 or 10 to 7, and oftentimes much later than that. And so that took a while. Things have gotten so much better. You work at a place, and people have a much better sense of boundaries, of knowing this is when I start, this is when I stop, and I have lunch at this time. People need breaks and rest, and if you're creative, you really need to save the energy, for your batteries, for your creative batteries. So that was a big eye opener. Besides learning that right out of the gate from school, I was good enough to do these jobs technically, but a lot of the learning I had was through various animation studios, and quite frankly, just sitting next to people and watching them work and learning. Because it's very different from school. School, you have your projects, people silo themselves off. I commuted, so I didn't have a dorm at School of Visual Arts, which is another thing that sort of set me apart. I came home to Brooklyn every night and took the trades in. I had, a lot of the kids who went to SVA had dorm rooms, and they came from pretty wealthy families. I found out when I was at School of Visual Arts, I had a job at Kmart stocking shoes while after I went to class, and a lot of the kids I went to school with were rich, had never held a job, were able to only work on animation. So that was something I was up against, and I realized that the minute I stepped into the industry. But once you start working, I knew that I wanted to be there. I wanted to make art, and even if someone, I had that RSD, though I didn't know it at the time. So I was always very sensitive. I think all artists are to a certain extent. But once I started to realize, oh, people aren't giving me notes because they are upset with me, though it sometimes felt like that. They're giving me notes because they want me to get better and they know I can do better. And once you start to realize that, and people realize you're willing to work on those notes, and you're honestly just a nice person to be around and work with, they'll always recommend you. They'll always call you up. They'll always say, "Hey, I remember Nelson. I remember Morgan. They were fantastic, and they were nice to sit next to and be around." Back then you sat next to someone for like 8 hours, and so you wanted to know that the person you sat next to was a cool person, and just not even cool, just a nice person. And once you sort of figure out those couple of things, right? That you're decent at your job and willing to learn, you're a nice person, and you're reliable, right? You're going to be there every day. You're going to work with them. Then all of a sudden, that opened up so many things because everyone knows that about you. If you fill two of those three things, they'll always call you back. And so some of the studios were rough, but for the most part in New York City, there were so many places to work. Even now, there's places in New York City that you can work at in the animation industry that aren't part of the animation industry as it's sort of advertised. A lot of people think of cartoon shows, they think of Pixar or DreamWorks, they think of a lot of studios that are in LA or Canada, quite frankly. But in New York, there is a system of smaller studios that does a lot of the commercial work that you see on television. PSYOP and Charlex and Nathan Love and Shiloh and the Office of Design and Development. All these studios do lots of different things. It has changed recently. Of course, everyone sort of feels that online, the sort of AI thing, which we could talk about. But yeah, coming up in New York City animation, it's been a lot of fun. It's been tough. But once I sort of mastered that idea that if you have two of those three things, right? Being nice, being reliable, and being pretty decent at your job, you started to get hired, and then you start making your rounds at various animation studios. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. I apologize.
No, please. That was great. I feel like that had so much in it. So thank you. We do have some questions. I'm just scrolling. I think the first one is from David Fernandez. How do you stay motivated to create art during these difficult times?
Mm. Yeah, that's a tough one. I would say there's still so much inspiration. I would say, first of all, one of the things that everyone should sort of try not to do is try not to doom scroll. Don't if it's the end of the day and you're on your phone in your bed in the darkness looking at things on Instagram. One of the things I noticed with my algorithms were um, things would get darker. Like just the videos would get meaner and more aggressive, and they'd show more violent things. And it was always at nighttime this was happening. And this is a recent thing I've noticed. I'm not on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I go on LinkedIn. But I find a lot of inspiration from my kids. I find a lot of inspiration from, quite frankly, the mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani. Never thought in a million years that he was going to win. And then he did, and he has stayed keeping me motivated and it's inspired. Um, and just lots of things that I try to sort of cultivate, which is I love to read books and my friends, just talking to friends and family, super inspirational, super motivational. Finding, and it's funny because we're talking about this with our students. There's a lot of great things on Instagram Reels. There's a lot of great things on TikTok. It's fun. However, none of that is actual life. Actual life is going to a coffee shop and sitting there and drawing the people around you. And not even drawing, just observing them and seeing people's day to day, realizing, hey, I'm not the only person here. There are 100 different stories unfolding before you. And I take a lot of inspiration from realizing that despite what I see on the internet and despite, what is sort of in the media about how horrible things can get, there are people doing beautiful things all around you. And there is a beauty in the daily struggle of what people are doing. So just going to a coffee shop and seeing people doing their thing is super inspirational. Seeing people meet up with friends and laughing. I again I can't stress enough the book thing. I bring books to my class, and I'm just like, I tell all the students, hey, I've got all these great art books. And like one or two of them look at the books, and I'm just so sad because they're so, what is the most popular movie right now that is breaking the bank and nobody thought it was going to be this humongous blockbuster? The Odyssey. Never in a million years would I think someone taking Homer's The Odyssey that would be like the number one blockbuster in the world. But again, based on this ancient text, this ancient poem by Homer. So cultivate the things around you that aren't online that you love. Maybe that's going outside and collecting rocks, or maybe that's going outside and painting trees. Go outside, go outside and witness life. Go to a jazz club, go to a concert. I cannot stress enough, we all went through the pandemic. And when I was going through it with my son, who was 2, none of the parks were open. So when you have a 2-year old and you can't even go to a park, what do you do? And we would stay on the sidewalks. I'd find like the biggest, widest sidewalks so he could ride his scooter. And now, once we got back to things like, be amazed and go into the city, go see a concert, go to places in person and just witness everybody's lives. It's super inspiring. You'll be surprised how many ideas you get for stories just watching people.
Wow, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you, Nelson.
Of course.
Morgan, Morgan has a question. There's a lot of women and BIPOC artist students, and it's wonderful that you're giving back to students as a professor, which, yes, that's amazing. Do you believe there's still a gap between how diverse animation students are versus who ends up in the animation industry? If so, how do we bridge that gap and let all artists be able to get their foot in the animation door?
That's an incredible question. Uh, there are so many creators. I think of specifically the creator of Has Been Hotel. I think her name is Vivian Madrid. Someone maybe can put it in the chat. But they are a Latina person. They have Has Been Hotel. They also have another show, and it's their show, and it's a show that, from what I understand, they started at S School of Visual Arts, but they took it online on YouTube, and it's become its own thing. Amazon picked it up, and they're doing incredibly well. One of the things that I think is so amazing, Vizzy Pop, thank you. Yes, and an indie animator. Yes. Um, Incredible because for a long time, I would pitch shows to Nickelodeon or pitch shows to Amazon, and what you're doing or what I was doing was taking these shows and taking them to gatekeepers, people who had a say. And by the way, every time I pitched, it was always pitching to people who are way, way older, and almost always sort of white American people. But you're going to them and you're showing a thing, and they're saying yes or no. And what's happening online on YouTube, especially, is there are a lot of creators who are able to just put their content out there, and when it gets popular, I mean, the only real gatekeeper is kind of YouTube. And I know there are some issues with YouTube, but for the most part, someone can go online and start to create a show or a comic, or take, their OCs, their original characters, and put them out there and develop an audience. When I started, that wasn't a thing you could do at all. That wasn't even in anyone's sort of minds yet. And now I think what's happening is, not only do you have creators making their own content, but they're forming studios. So I think for BIPOC and women in animation, and just anybody who's a minority, more so now than ever, there is nothing stopping anyone from forming a studio. We talked about this in class today because we were talking about this my guest speaker, who's two twins. They are twins. Is what I meant to say. They're brothers. Dan Pinto and Gabe Pinto. You can look them up online. They're both incredible animation artists. But they were talking to someone else who said that, they were like, I want to form a studio. I worked on this cool commercial and we did it with my friends. And one of their professors was like, yeah, you're a studio. Just go and do more of that. Go get more of those commercials, and that's it. You're a studio. And I think that's something that people sort of forget, is that the only thing stopping you from once you've graduated school from getting that work is really just you and your friends deciding to get together and going out there and getting that work. So I think it's shifted. A lot of the work has become indie. It's gone to YouTube, and people are building their own audiences, and they are slowly but surely forming their own studios. I mean, even something like Digital Circus, which is, Glitch, and that's in Australia, but and I see that Cleana mentioned this. Thank you, Cleana. But there are all these productions that are forming, and they're not Nickelodeon. They're not Disney. They're not all these, again, gatekeepers or these big places with lots of money. They're a bunch of friends who have the passion and the wherewithal to make what they love. And guess what? Other people love it too. So it's, I think more than ever, it's about getting together and forming alliances and taking a chance on yourselves, and then going out there and finding that work, which is still difficult. I realize I'm oversimplifying and really sort of speaking in generalizations, but really, there more than ever, there's a lot more accessibility, though there isn't complete accessibility. Like, for example, Adobe Creative Cloud is quite expensive. One of the challenges with some of this is that when you have young animators who do not have a ton of money, telling them to go get Adobe Photoshop is kind of wild, right? Like, I don't want to have to tell someone to get a $74 subscription a month service just so they can, draw something. So that is still a problem, but there's a lot less gatekeeping, a lot more accessibility to who you are. And I think that's kind of where the change is happening. I don't think AI is it. I'll tell you that right off the bat. I am not a proponent of AI. But yes, Procreate is good and portable. I see Veronica Gonzalez says that. Raven says they use Fresco tool. Yeah, and there's so many more tools. Like Procreate is like maybe $10, or someone could correct me or tell me, or $15 or something like that. Nomad Sculpt on the iPad. Of course, then the big hurdle is getting the iPad, but there are lots of options where you can you spend your money in one way, but then have everything else. Yes, Toon Squid, I've also heard of that. One-time purchase of $10 for Procreate. Thank you, Veronica. Yeah, totally. And Procreate you can animate in. So there's a lot more options. And again, forming alliances and getting out there online, making that studio with your friends.
Thing. And then I think that goes into the next question of William Nava asked, I'm curious when you feel it's time to go indie versus working with a studio. Does studio culture factor into this?
Yeah, big time. I mean, there were a number of places that I worked at where studio culture was incredibly toxic. And a lot of times the owners of the studios would make it toxic, which was really upsetting. It has changed greatly, in such a positive way. One of my friends, Dan Pinto, works for the Animation Guild, and they've been able to form unions at Titmouse here in New York City and also in LA. And there's a lot more protection for their rights. And working for a studio is great. You learn so much on a production that you can bring into an indie animation studio. Um, and it's one of those questions that is great because it's essentially like what comes first, the chicken or the egg question. And the answer is whatever you can start on first. That's it. I would never say, hey, wait and get studio experience. It's definitely helpful if you can get studio experience and get your foot in the door. Right now is kind of an unprecedented time because so many producers, so many studios are really hedging their bets on these large language models. They are trying to take all these tools. I don't even like calling it AI because it's not really artificial intelligence once you start to learn about it. There was a computer scientist who said that the black box, you hear, Sam Altman of OpenAI sort of talk about what the black box is. They don't know. One scientist was like, "Oh, the black box is people. That's what the black box is. It's all of our artwork. It's all of human culture." And the internet, they've scraped the internet. And there are a lot of producers trying to use AI and say, hey, we're not going to hire as many workers because we don't need it. But then it's turning out that, again, I'll go back to the Odyssey just to use a huge multi-million-dollar example. The Odyssey was created with these giant IMAX cameras, right? They're having to put blimps around the IMAX cameras because they're so loud. They are made. His movies, Christopher Nolan's movies, are made practically. And again, nothing in it is AI. It is all made by hand. There's some CGI. There's some, optical illusions and effects. But for the most part, this blockbuster is kind of anti-AI and is amazing, and it's making all this money. And it just goes to show you, at the end of the day, I really think this AI is a bubble that will burst, and when it does burst, things will start. A lot of jobs will start to come back. But if you can get work at a studio, cool. There are a ton of people trying to get people to work with artwork using AI tools. If you feel comfortable doing that, there's a lot of places that'll do this thing where they have artists make artwork, and then instead of taking stolen artwork from the internet, they'll train these models on that artwork. I'm not necessarily against that. I'm just not. That's not for me. But if you cannot find a studio job, no problem. Go out there and go out with your friends and start talking to places that you think would benefit from having animation. Maybe there's a company around your way where you can see them advertising, and you're like, hey, I'd love to make you an animated commercial. I could give you a discount. Let's make something together. You'd be surprised how many people are like, oh, I'm kind of interested in doing that. Even if you don't end up making the animation, I guarantee you they might hire you to do graphics, or they might hire you to make a mascot. Um, you know, shoot for the moon and land on the stars, as it were. So if you can't get that job at the animation studio, the production experience on a studio is incredible. You'll learn so much, but you can also learn just as much working with friends and creating your own production. So, you know, what comes first, the studio or the indie project? It depends on what your path is, and I know that answer is kind of a cop out, but it's true. You will find your path forward, and it may be different from you than your friend. Maybe your friend got a studio job, but if you can do it with your friends, you should do it. You can get work that way as well. And Clarissa, yes, AI is a big turd. Here, here.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Nelson. So, Veronica Gonzalez asked, thank you for this. Do you have any recommendations for entry-level jobs for those who have been 3 to 5 years or more post-grad? There are not that many internships that include post-grads past the 6 month mark, and totally understand what you're saying, Veronica. But yeah, Nelson, what do you have?
That's a hard one, but I'll try to take it. So one of the things that I think people forget is you may have gone to school for animation, um, and you may be looking for specifically animation work. One of my heroes and one of my favorite animation people is a Disney animator named Tom Cito. If you look him up, you'll see a vast resume. Tom must be like in his 70s. He also has a great book about animation unions, specifically the Disney animation strike in 1941. Um, but Tom worked on all these Disney features, and he said something that has always stuck with me, which is he said, if you are an animator, you are lucky in terms of work because animation is so difficult. The chances are that if you studied animation, you can probably do a lot of other jobs in other art fields: photography, illustration, graphic design, storyboarding. And I don't mean storyboarding just for television shows, I mean storyboarding for commercials, storyboarding for pharmaceutical companies. Um, so, if you're 3 to 5 years out and you're still looking, I would say widen your scope. Widen your scope and start to look at jobs that you think you might not be qualified for. One of the biggest secrets about working creatively is that once you figure out that you should apply to jobs you think you're unqualified for, you will realize that some of these jobs are posting these very wide sort of asks in terms of skill. And then when you talk to them, it turns out that what they were doing is they were just casting a wide net. They were casting a wide net, and they were hoping that you somehow knew Toon Boom and somehow also knew Cinema 4D and also knew Maya and also could code. I am going to say that internally, a lot of these places know that they will probably not get that. They will probably get two out of the six things that they're looking for, and they're going to be happy with that. When you widen your sort of net, the other thing about that is applying to jobs that are illustration, applying to jobs that are graphic design, applying to jobs that are storyboarding, applying to jobs that are photo retouching. A lot of jobs, and I'm not saying this as like don't go into animation or don't find an animation job. What I'm saying is your animation skills apply across the board in a very wide way to a lot of different kinds of creative jobs. Once you start to realize that, you will start to find a lot more work. I've had animation friends who would get jobs doing jewelry making. I've had, like I told you, I did courtroom sketching. I've had friends who have done, animatics, specifically animatics for commercials. There is a company in New York City. This is kind of an interesting thing. There's a company in New York City that only makes animatics. That's all they do, and their bread and butter is just making animatics. They make 3D animatics, and the company I work for, the Animation Project, which is another similar to New York Edge, except it's paired with creative arts therapists, which is really interesting and unique. to this day still the only organization that does that as a nonprofit. But they would hire people from the animation project all the time, young kids, to do a little bit of 3D to make these animatics. So there's a lot of places out there. New York City has so many creative studios, small, tiny studios that make their bread and butter, um, making commercials, making short clips, making social media accounts. And some of these brands that you see on TV, Colgate, Verizon, Ford, they're making all sorts of content. They're making content for social. They're making content for TV. Um, Guess what? They're also making content for. If you live in New York City or you live in any major city, there are screens on cabs. Someone is being paid to make those. There are screens in Times Square that are huge and weird sizes. There are screens in stores. People are getting paid to do that. So there are all these jobs. It's just a lot of people. What happens with the 3 to 5 year gap is, and I've talked to a lot of students who have this, is if your focus if you're laser focused on just animation as being cartoons or animation as being just Pixar or just DreamWorks or just Illumination, then yeah, you're gonna keep going years without the work. But if you make that wider and you start to realize, like Morgan said, being an animator means being a jack of all trades. All of a sudden, you're gonna find that you can get work doing so many other things, and you'll be surprised. Animation has a funny way of sort of slipping into lots of different industries, and you might be working. You might have gotten a job doing graphic design on something. Maybe you're making some small little logos, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh man, it would be cool if we could animate this." And then that's when you come in and you're like, "Hey, I actually went to school for animation. I don't just do logos. I can animate this for you right now." I can't tell you how many times I have had that happen. And then they're like, all right, we're going to have you animate this. Awesome. So if you're 3 to 5 years out, widen your vision. Look for those other jobs that are creative and tangential, but aren't necessarily the thing you were looking for.
It's amazing. Like you got to stay creative because Veronica, I was also like in that position of I was post grad, the whole 6 month thing. And it's really disheartening, to see to go through the listings and be like, oh, I don't qualify for this one. And you try to apply anyway, but you kind of know like you don't have like a huge chance because of that. Like a lot of them are very strict about it and they have their rules and stuff. So I totally get you, Veronica, but you'll find a way and it's good to be flexible and to just think more creatively. And that's what I also tell people all the time. Expand the search, think of things that maybe aren't. So like on the nose animation or like, so thank you so much, Nelson, because that's really resonated with me. Raven asked, I'm still recovering from some intense burnout after graduating from art school. Do you have any tips for dealing with that and just getting work done when it feels hard?
Mm. Yeah. I think there's a book called The Artist's Way. Some of you may have heard about it. Sometimes people make fun of it um, because it's kind of like a new agey sort of way to approach our creativity. But The Artist's Way is a book that is about trying to get back to making stuff more often, more impulsively. And one of the things, I'm not even saying get the book. I'm just going to say one thing from it that has always been amazing to think about and super helpful is um, you have creative batteries. Your creative battery is going to drain. The world right now is so fraught and unstable in a lot of ways um, that if you're just reading the news, if you're just on your phone, it feels like a weight. I remember I went to the doctor recently and they asked me, they were like, how are you doing? Like, how do you feel? And I was just like, oh, I feel fine. I was like, do you mean like do I feel fine about the state of the world? And then they laughed, and we all had a good laugh because they were just like, yeah, like, there's a lot going on, and it's not all good, and um, you know, you need to refill those creative batteries, and sometimes the world can sort of eat away at that. Personal things, whatever you have going on in your life, family issues, friend issues, whatever is going on, when life is lifing. The artist way has this idea of an artist's date, and the artist's date is with you and what you love. And so, and maybe that sounds hokey, but truly taking time out to not worry about, oh, am I producing artwork? Am I making content? I hate the word content. I hate that everybody's like, I need to produce content for my Instagram reel or my YouTube. No, you don't. You need to make art that's from you. And in order to do that, to make your best art, you need to refill those creative batteries. And the only way to do that is to go back to the source, the reason why you love doing what you do and what you want to do, which is making art. Go back to the stuff that you love to see. Go to the movies and go see a Studio Ghibli film, like go see Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro. Go see a Broadway show. Go see a piece of artwork that you have never looked at before. And just take it in. Allow yourself the time and the space to just take in what you love. And sometimes people will use this phrase guilty pleasure. Oh, what's your guilty pleasure? What do you like? But guilty pleasures are things you like. There's nothing guilty about it. Maybe it's guilty because other people might not like it, but so what? Screw that. Get it. Like the things you like and love them, and give yourself the time and the energy and the space to take that in, and give yourself a day or two. Maybe you need a week, and just literally take things in and really give yourself a beautiful, healthy diet of the things that make you happy. I really can't emphasize that enough. Reading a book or listening to a piece of music, especially music. I love listening to music. When I get a musician or an album that I love, that can give me so much um, fuel for the tank. So taking that time, I think, as we've entered this sort of digital world where, again, everyone is obsessed with content, everyone is obsessed with, I have to post, I need to get those numbers up, I need to get followers up. We can get obsessed with metrics, and the problem with metrics is that it's a classification system, right? And classification systems are made by Mark Zuckerberg, who made Instagram and the algorithms, all of his programmers are writing. Those aren't real. What's real is why you loved the thing you loved when you saw it the first time. That's real. That's nuanced. That can't be quantified. And you need to, when you need to refill those batteries, you need to go back to the source. Did you love The Three Musketeers? Go back and read that. Did you love My Neighbor Totoro? I always go back to that because it's a favorite film line. Go back and watch that. So again, take that time, rest, breathe, drink that tea in the park, and take that art book with you and look at it, take it in, and give yourself the space to do that.
Thank you, Nelson. And I definitely second like the going out in nature. I'm not much of a nature person. I don't hike or do any of that, but it's nice just to even go to the park and like look at the sky, as corny as that sounds, and just kind of look at the trees. And I'm like, it's not so bad. Or like, even we can like look at these small problems or even big ones and be like, oh, it's everything's the end, maybe. But then you kind of gain a little perspective maybe by stepping out of your desk area and stuff. Thank you, Raven.
Important.
And we also have fun events at Viva la Animación at our Discord server. So if you're in on Discord online, we're starting the cafecitos again once Brianna is back from her visiting her family in Peru, and we have figure drawing nights and other things going on the Discord. So feel free to come chat. Just it's supposed to be a space for just us to hang out and not feel so pressured. And feel free to join us for our events in Los Angeles, in the California area, and New York too, just to meet fellow peeps in animation. Um, you still have time, Nelson? We have a couple of questions. Are you good?
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure.
No,
Thank you. Celine Haddadin asks, sorry if I mispronounced, how can a self-taught artist demonstrate that they're production ready, especially if they don't have a degree or studio experience?
that's a great question. That's something we were talking about today in my other class was you don't necessarily have to have a degree at all. If you have an incredible body of work, people will find you, and especially now more than ever with, I was talking about followers and numbers and stuff. I don't want to discourage anyone from putting their work out there. That's super important. Making a website super important, but you don't have to have 100 million followers or 200,000 likes to have an art director find you on Instagram. It gets difficult sometimes. The algorithm can work against us, but there are art directors and people who are looking for artists, and they just want to see really beautiful art that's consistent. If you can be consistent with what you're making, that can mean a lot of different things depending on what kind of work you want. But if you can show consistency, if you can show a lot of times, especially with like character design, one of the things I've sort of talked about is a lot of art directors will look for sort of like a narrative or like how narrative of a thought process, right? Like you made this cool character, maybe they're an elephant that's like a warrior with a sword or two swords or what have you, but they want to see that you can show sort of how you got to this character design, especially if it's yours. That's a great way to be production ready, but it all depends on specifically what the target goal is. If you wanted to be a previs artist on like a DreamWorks movie or feature film, that's different. That'll be a different kind of sort of portfolio. But do you have to have that degree? Not at all. Really, you just have to have again that body of work that shows you can be consistent making a bunch of things. Um, One of the things that people who are going to college get from going to a 4 year program or even a 2 year program is that they have to finish it. And that's part of it. Is it's not so much a degree as it is like, oh, you finished the 4 years. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're looking for. They're just looking for, can you make a lot of different kinds of artwork, and can you show that you're sort of committed to making a bunch of pieces? If you can do that and put it online, um, you'd be surprised. There are a lot of artists who have been sort of found on Instagram, on Tumblr. I know Tumblr's, again, I'm old, so maybe no one here remembers Tumblr, but there are lots of different avenues: Blue Sky, Substack, putting your artwork out. You never know who will see it. One of the creative directors at Nickelodeon. This is kind of an interesting thing I don't bring up a lot, and I wish I did, but I went to MoCA, which is like the Museum of Comic Art and Cartooning. They used to have a festival where you could buy a table or rent a table and sell comics. And I would do that. And one day, the creative director of Nickelodeon, who I worked with at Nickelodeon, stopped by, and I had no idea that he would go to comic festivals and look at tables and look at artwork to bring people on to work on Nickelodeon shows. So the degree doesn't matter as much. It can help if you're someone sees it, they see, oh, you went to this art school, they finished that program, that's really hard. But really, at the end of the day, it's just about your portfolio and showing that you can have some kind of consistency and a focus, right? Not just doing a million different styles or doing copies of cartoon characters, but having a focus of, I have a character design portfolio, I have all these turnarounds, I've showed sketch to, clean up to polish design. Um, if you can do that, you can find a job at a studio, or an art director might find you for a project. Doesn't necessarily have to be a degree.
Thank you. Just a second. Let me see. Did I miss a question? Oh no, Celine, and then we did the David one, and then Cleana, wait. Do you have any advice for an animator that wants to find their own unique art style, but it always seems to be the same advice, get experience in life, take inspiration from other artists, but it never really feels like it's working sometimes and you're trying your best?
Those are all true. Those old cliches are cliches for a reason. But I will do something that came up today in class, actually, which was the first thing anybody ever does when they sort of start drawing. At least for me, what I used to do when I was a kid was I'd see a comic book. Maybe it's the Avengers, maybe it's Wolverine, and I just copy the art. Um, and for some reason, I've noticed that like art teachers, fine art teachers will do this, but for some reason in animation, and there's always this big emphasis on making original artwork, and that is great. And I also did just say, not to contradict myself, because I realized I literally just said, hey, when you're doing this portfolio and you have focus, don't do well-known characters. What I mean by that is, don't have that as part of your portfolio. But if you're looking to find a style and a voice, um, experiment by copying styles and then seeing what fits well and what you're learning from sort of doing that. One of the best ways to learn is just to sort of sit there and try to emulate the line work, try to do the same sort of uh, color treatment on an illustration, and really sit there and sort of figure out, oh, can I copy this exactly as is? And once you do it, and if you do so successfully, or even if you don't, finding out, oh, I really like thinking this way with the line. Um, you'll find out that's a very fast way to sort of realize to try on different styles. And whether or not you can emulate it. Yeah, sure. All those things are true. All the things you said, Klana. But don't be afraid to just be like, hey, man, I really like this Tamagotchi Life artwork on the cover. That looks super cool. I'm going to try to emulate this and copy it. You might find out once you do that you're like, oh, this sort of unlocked something in my brain. That is super important. I feel like art teachers don't talk about that. Artists don't talk about that a lot, or they sort of shy away from it because it's kind of a. I think what happens is people are like, oh, if I want to work on The Simpsons, I should draw The Simpsons. You shouldn't put that in your portfolio, but if you're taking some time to practice that art style and see if you can do it, that's not a bad thing. That's a really great way to sort of study a style and try it on, see if it works. So I'd say, yeah, just go and sort of try to emulate pieces as an exercise and see what fits. You'll find out really quickly, oh, I hate working like this with this line art. This is really difficult for me. And then you might find another style. It's like very fluid, very efficient, feels really good. And then all of a sudden that's going to inform your style. I think that's a really great way to sort of tackle that.
Wow, thank you. It's like the whole self-discovery through others' art. I mean, people have been doing that for centuries now, just kind of copying, if you want to even say that. I feel like it's more like studying,
For
artists
sure.
of the
Yes.
past or other art styles, and just kind of seeing, oh, wait, how is mine different? Like what do I actually like? So that was beautiful. That was our last question from the audience. I'm just double checking, don't want to miss anyone. But I do want to ask, like, just kind of briefly, like, I would love to reach out to you and think about how we can collaborate with Viva la Animación in general, like, because going to be doing a lot for Hispanic Heritage Month in California and New York. And I would love, you were just so inspiring. Like Raven said that you brought them to tears rather. And people thought you had beautiful advice, and you've been such a pleasure to listen to that I feel like more people need to see and hear you, Nelson. I
I would
would,
love to help out.
yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, we'll think of things. I'll be in New York probably in September at some point, and I think it'll be cool to meet and think what we can do with the head of the New York team. So, and you guys, of course, are all invited. So that's it for me. Do you have maybe any parting words for all of the people here?
Uh, Keep making your art. And if you ever feel like you're in doubt or you feel like what you're making is not good enough, don't worry about that. Just keep making stuff, make lots of it, and have fun. Put on headphones, get lost in your artwork and in the process. And I guarantee you, you will find joy in that process, and other people will see it and they'll see your joy.
Thank you, Nelson. And just to repeat, Eric said, this has been inspiring. Thank you. Liliana said, thank you so much for the advice. And the funny thing is most people tell me I have an art style, but I just see my fan art tutorial drawings and once in a while
Ah,
those to you.
yeah, yes.
Thank you so much. Great questions and amazing answers. Thank you so much. Everyone loves you, Nelson. So thank you so much. Well, hope everyone has a good rest of your day and we'll see each other again, Nelson.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for having me. I loved talking with everyone.
Thank you. All right. See you next time. I'll be uploading this on YouTube so you can rewatch how many times you want.
Take it
Bye.
easy.
Bye.